Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, The Roles of Data Stewards. It is the latest installment of the monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A section. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely change that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you may find those icons in the bottom middle of your screen for those features. And to answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording, and we'll likewise send a link to the recording of the session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an acknowledged data management authority, an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of DAMA International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 35 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in 30 countries, including some of the world's most important. Among his 13 books are many firsts. Starting before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter has founded several organizations that have helped more than 200 organizations leverage data-specific savings, which have been measured at more than 1.5 billion US dollars. His latest is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Peter, hello and welcome.
And hello to you, Shannon, and hello to everybody out there. It's such a pleasure to be with you again. Today's topic is a really fun one. I'm super looking forward to questions at the end of the hour that we're going to come back around here and talk about this. But I really do see the roles of data steward as being increasingly more important as we continue our journey into the AI world. So let's just jump right to the program here. We're going to start out and talk about, first of all, sort of 3 different parts here. One, why do we need data stewards as a role? And you'll see that this is an overlooked role, in my opinion, at this point in time. Then we'll talk about the roles, what they are supposed to do, and talk specifically around those topics. Then we'll talk about how to go about selecting your first group of data. Quick bottom line there, I think that steward should be a full-time position as opposed to a part-time position. As Shannon mentioned then, the part that we look forward to is the takeaways, and question and answer will be there in about an hour. Let's jump right in. Why do we need data stewardship as a role? Well, one of the things I like to ask, and if we were in person, I would certainly ask, but I find that about half of you out there are restarting your data steward efforts as opposed to starting them. And that isn't a really good thing. And we'll talk about sort of what the pitfalls have been and why that's an issue. But I'll give you some specific examples on this. Those of you that know me at all know that I'm a musician, as is Shannon, and we like to think of things in musical contexts here. And yet, if somebody were to say, I'm the most important part of my band, most people don't do that. And so even though this is a well thought out sentiment, I'm pretty sure that most organizations are working and are able to live without data stewards at this point. And we have to do more than just simply proclaim that they are important. So let's look at some specific definitions. Dictionary is always a good place to start. And in this case, we look up and say, what is a steward? It's a person who's employed to manage another's property. You can see some synonyms in there: custodian, caretaker, et cetera, around that. Stewarding then is to manage or look after one other's property. And a data steward then is a person who manages data assets on behalf of all the stakeholders in the organization. And this in particular talks about a position of trust. Excuse me, big sneeze. It's springtime here. And in addition to trust, there's also the nature of the word fiduciary. We're going to come back and look at that a little bit more, but many of you have fiduciary relationships that you're working with people already, and you should expect nothing less from a steward around this. When we look at these issues, again, it's a very important aspect of all of this to say, Steward is one who actively directs, again, keeping in the dictionary. And if we're going to go a little bit further than that, I'll say that a data steward is one who actively directs the use of organizational data assets in support of specific missions. In other words, data is one of the assets that you have in your organization, and a data steward is someone who makes sure that those data assets are used fully in support of the specific mission and objectives. This was a poster that we got from one particular organization, the International Data Stewards Day. I'm not sure if that day really does exist, but maybe somebody can help us out by dropping it in the chat and taking a look at it. Here is an interesting piece from IBM, and I say it's interesting because they're looking at all sorts of really interesting roles around data and analytics. And they only talk about stewards in two parts. One, they talk about a data analytics steward and a citizen data steward. And notice that neither of these are must have roles. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because, once again, I think people are severely underestimating the need for data stewards and data stewardship here. Let me give you another one. This is an organization that employs about 3,500 software developers, and they're looking at what AI is doing to their environment. You can notice the things on the left-hand side of the chart here are all sort of traditional business roles that we have in there, and they're very interesting and all that. But notice they see in phase one of this, they're going to eliminate and consolidate most of those roles down into a fewer number of roles. This is what they believe the effect of AI is going to be on the software development. Here is phase two. Looking at it, you can see even fewer on the right-hand side people going into these roles. It's just a very, very important consolidation to think about. And notice none of them have anything to do with data. Again, if I was advising this organization, I'd say that you should probably have at least one person in there paying attention to the data roles. But the reason for this is relatively well known to us in the data community. IT has thought for years and years that data is a business problem, and their attitude has been, if they can connect to the server, my job is done. Whereas business thinks that IT is managing. After all, you have somebody there with the title Chief Information Officer. Who else would be taking care of it? And as a result, data has fallen into a giant chasm between business and IT. And it's up to us to go back and repair that and make everything run smoother as a result of this. Now, another very important characteristic here goes to people say data stewards are the data owners, or that somebody in the organization is the data owner. I absolutely say no. It's the worst thing that you can say to an organization is that somebody owns the data, because then you end up with a different kind of data mining. It's more important to go back to that word I referenced a minute ago, fiduciary relationship. Nobody owns the data, but several people, hopefully your stewards, have been placed in a fiduciary responsibility, a fiduciary relationship. If somebody insists on using the word ownership, allow them to own the data requirements, and that will shut them up right away, because that's a hard job. And in fact, what they should do is own the data requirements from the time they hit your well-defined business process until the time they exit your well-defined business process, because another business process might actually have different data requirements. Think of it in these terms. What data would accounting own if they were owning data in there? Well, accounting gets data from all over the organization. And again, it just makes no sense. So just say no to data ownership. It is just absolutely the most problematic concept involved in stewardship and governance in general. In addition to that, most people are really unaware about data debt. And data debt is something that slows progress, decreases quality, increases costs, and presents greater risks around it. And most people don't really understand that causes things to slow down, gets in the way of all the planning that is involved in making data work better for the organization. Now, again, most people concentrate on analytics as the part of it. I say that data management is a necessary but insufficient prerequisite to getting analytics or AI or anything else in your organization right. Let's go back to that word fiduciary that I said we were going to come back to. A fiduciary is the person who's legally obligated to act in the best interest of the individual that's employing the fiduciary. Included in that group are lawyers, trustees, doctors, accountants, corporate directors, legal guardians, et cetera, et cetera. And that fiduciaries generally have duties that are specified in particular. They have a duty to act in good faith, a duty of care for their client, and a duty of loyalty to the organization that is employing them around these topics. Fiduciaries have legal and ethical standards that they must generally adhere to. And this is a problem because most people aren't looking out for the data. So the fiduciaries around the data are people with a specific interest in data asset management. Another important concept to understand is one that comes from Hans Christian Andersen, of all people. He wrote a wonderful story many years ago, a fairy tale called The Princess on the Pea. You can see I've circled the P in yellow down here at the bottom. And up here at the top is the princess who sleeps because one P, that imperfection in the bottom of those 20 or 30 mattresses that are there, is causing her to be sleepless. Well, failure to get the data right on the part of the stewards means that you're locking in those imperfections for the life of the application, restricting future benefits that can be gained from it, and of course, decreasing the organizational data leverage around it. Most importantly, though, and this is where you can get management's attention, accounting for 20 to 40% of IT budgets migrating, converting, or improving the data. Bad data practices, just like the data debt, cause everything to take longer, cost more, deliver less, and present greater risk. Again, thank you to Tom DeMarco for those wonderful pieces on this. And to give you a specific example of this, I was just on the phone with a very wonderful customer service rep from United Airlines, with whom I imagine I do a lot of business because I travel a lot, and American Airlines, which I also have hundreds of thousands of miles on each of these things. By the way, career advice, do not split your miles across airlines. It's a really bad idea. Put them all on one, but we'll come back to that later on. So here's an article that occurred in the height of the pandemic where American Airlines at the time was valued at 6 billion US dollars, but the data in their American Advantage program was valued at $30 billion. Similarly, United Airlines was valued at the market of $9 billion and $22 billion for their American Advantage program. Now, one question that United ought to be asking themselves is, why is American Airlines data valued so much more than United Airlines in there? And most importantly, both CEOs, I guarantee you, are sitting around saying, how do I unlock the additional 24 or $13 billion in data value on this? They don't know. And because they don't know, they are stuck sort of not being able to do much except for some fairly crude things. In focusing the organization's data assets on strategic objectives, we need to understand data strategy. And that is the idea. I just use this as a placeholder, but most people think of data strategy incorrectly. There's an organization strategy, there's an IT strategy, and from that IT strategy comes a data strategy. I know that was a little bit faint, but Morgan Freeman, I sampled him saying this is wrong. He is, of course, perfectly correct on that. I doubt he knows that is. I've got him endorsing this particular piece, but I do think it's a wonderful way of describing this. I think it's from an X-Men movie or something like that. So how should it be? Well, the organizational strategy should spawn both an IT strategy and a data strategy. And in Peter's world, the data strategy is more influential on the organization than is the IT strategy in order to do this. That's the first job of stewards, is to make sure that the data strategy is not derived from an IT, derived directly from the organizational strategy. And to understand that even better, we ought to go back to the word strategy in and of itself. We didn't use the word before about 1950 or so, when management consultants discovered this term and came up with these grand plans, knowing that they could sell now a 100-page document or 1,000 PowerPoint slides to people for lots and lots of money. And that meant that strategy became a thing. If we go back to the original term of strategy, derived from the military context, strategy actually means a pattern in a stream of decisions, which means it's more of a process than it is a thing. Let me give you 3 brief examples. First one is from Walmart, who you all know because they did a great job with it, making sure that everybody, suppliers, customers, neighbors, everybody in the store understands that the focus of Walmart's business strategy is on everyday low price. If you make an error at Walmart, but you err on the side of everyday low price, there is generally no penalty involved in that kind of a mistake that's there because they want people to understand everyday low price is what means to be a Walmart customer, a Walmart employee, a Walmart supplier. Second example, Wayne Gretzky, hockey. Again, if you're not familiar with it, again, great game, but that little round puck there at the bottom is very dense. And when you hit it with a stick, it travels much faster than a person. So Wayne Gretzky, who goes into this at length in his Wikipedia age, he thinks his strategy is that he skates to where he thinks the puck will be. Well, once again, a absolutely perfect example of strategy on this. Let's take our third example, Napoleon at Waterloo. Oh my goodness, we're getting really far here, but let's just take a look at it. How do I defeat the competition when their forces are bigger than mine? Answer is divide and conquer. Remember, it's a pattern and a stream of decisions. And here's the situation that Napoleon was facing. He looked at his lines of supply and found out that Napoleon in the blue was facing the British in the red and the Prussian in the black. The British were being supplied out of Ostend. That meant their food, clothing, and shelter was there. And the food, clothing, and shelter for the Prussian troops was here in Liege, which meant that if he could divide them by hitting them in exactly the right way, they would move apart. Once again, hit them exactly the right place and have the two armies move apart because, of course, when you get hit in the face, you tend to move towards safety rather than away from safety. That's divide. The second part of this was conquer, of course. And the conquer piece involved everybody turn to the right, and we're going to defeat the Prussian troops, and then everybody turn to the left, and we will defeat the British troops. Again, very good strategy. Turned out not to be successful, possibly because it was perhaps too complex for the relatively undereducated army that Napoleon had. Again, let's just review. Hit the armies exactly right in the right spot and hit them very hard so they will break apart, and when they break apart, they will go towards their supply lines as opposed to away from their supply lines. Then everybody as one turn to the right and defeat the Prussians, and then everybody turn to the left and defeat the British. Oh, and by the way, let's do this while we are shooting at people. In other words, bullets are flying and our lives are in danger. This is, hopefully you agree with me, an example of a complex strategy. It's still taught in US War College strategies, and yet it was an unsuccessful strategy, even though it seems like it is a very good one. Now, I want you to keep that complexity in mind and look at the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm a resident of the Commonwealth, where we've been trying to explain this type of data governance environment to people. And I want you to imagine trying to explain the role of stewards in this particular role to somebody like the governor, who just happens to be a very smart individual, but is not really going to understand the complexity of this environment. We are on our third attempt in Virginia here, trying to get data governance up and running. Once again, I think you see the challenges that are involved in here. Strategy guides work group activities. When a work group is trying to figure out what to do, whether it's data or process oriented in their task, they are going to use this pattern in a stream of decisions to do this. In addition to this, we also need to understand the role of governance and architecture as a component of this as well. Corporate governance is pretty straightforward. What's the role of the corporation organization as part of society? Now, we had some work going on about 5 years ago where Jamie Dimon said, hey, we really ought to look at this more holistically and not strictly look at it as maximizing shareholder value. We'll see whether that continues or not. It's certainly an interesting discussion to have, and I don't even Jamie Dimon is still paying attention to this, although there are certain companies that are still paying attention to this. Apple Computer, among others, is still maintaining that their role in society is absolutely critical, not just profits to keeping their is going, well, if we have corporate governance, we're going to have IT governance as well. This is the idea that aligning IT strategy with the business goals, producing measurable results, coming up with key questions around strategic alignment, value delivery, resource management, risk management, performance measures are just some of the things that we need to do from governing IT from a strategic perspective. And now look at our definitions for data governance. I'm going to put them up here. I'm certainly not going to read them to you, but you can see, of course, that there's lots and lots of them here, and I don't like any of them. It's unfortunate, but can you imagine being in an elevator and trying to explain to somebody that your data governance thing involves let's see, a formal orchestration of people, process, and technologies to enable an organization to data leverage as an enterprise asset. Remember, an elevator speech is about the boss gets on the elevator. Very short amount of time to explain this concept before the boss gets off the elevator and either invites you to their office to say, tell me more about this, or I'm going to put you on the list for people that I don't understand and therefore shouldn't be working for my organization here. So a little bit better definition perhaps of data governance instead of these complex ones. How about managing data with guidance? Now, that should be fairly easy because most people say, oh, okay, would we want our sole non-depleting, non-degrading, durable strategic asset managed without guidance? I think the answer to that, of course, is no. Now, as I move up the food chain, talking more to senior executives, I change this definition slightly and I make it managing data decisions with guidance, because most of these executives do not understand that they are making data decisions, and understand they're making data decisions, they tend to make data decisions that are bad for the organization. Here's a good way to think about the role of stewards in all of this. Most organizations start out with sort of a data architectural component here, looking at leadership, experts, others, and stewards in this process. Stewards, data trustees, and let's think of some concrete things. They're responsible for the glossary, the data dictionary, catalog that we're doing. Notice it can't be done without good foundational support from IT and systems development efforts. And most organizations draw this line around the left-hand side of the diagram and say, this is how we're going to form our data governance organization. Stewards, of course, making up a key component to this. Leadership is therefore responsible for bringing resources in. There's a lot of feedback that they gain from other sources. Leadership makes decisions. The data stewards are told to make it happen, and the action plan and the changes go into everybody else. In terms of working with this, we again need to have a source of feedback on this, new ideas that come into play, and guidance that goes back to leadership. I would not show this diagram to leaders. I would simplify it and just make it a little bit easier to understand here, so that people understand these concepts. And the data architecture is the strategic focus that is implemented by these stewards. So let's talk about architecture for just a minute. Architecture is about things, the function of those things, and how those things interact. Now, very easy way to describe all of this. It's obviously simple enough that the Dr. Seuss characters can implement it around here. But what we're really talking about from an architecture perspective is making sure we have at least a common vocabulary and a primary form of collaboration around this, because most organizations are familiar with the concept of a Tower of Babel, and that their people around the organization would benefit by speaking the same common vocabulary, the same language. This means that we need to make sure that we have understanding between not just the business users and technical personnel, but also the systems as well. If we don't have this all the way around, we will not have any ability to have this organization really communicating, working at its most effective in order to do this. And we need to write it all down in some form of a trusted catalog. It's okay to use a spreadsheet for these trusted catalogs. Many organizations get stuck because they want to spend 6 figures or 7 figures buying a quote metadata repository or something else. It's not where you need to be to start. I did happen to justify a large investment in a metadata repository by just having, in this case, all 3,500 workers at one organization, all IT workers, indicate they said that they would save 1 hour per year, and that was enough to cost justify this. So it's not hard to do it, but I wouldn't start there. I would start out with a spreadsheet, because all organizations have architectures. The question is, are they understood? And if they aren't documented, they certainly can't be useful to the organization. Of course, we add the word data in there, and it is still absolutely true. So we've spent a little bit of time looking at the definitions of stewards, data debt, the role of strategy and data architecture as a part of this. Now let's talk about what are they supposed to do. Of course, there's usually a gap in organizations. I've run into a bunch of different organizations where they have a version of this diagram drawn on the wall. They've got data on one side and they've got information on the top part. The information is clearly more valuable than the data, and they call it wetware, knowledge workers, informal communications, tribal knowledge, whatever it is. It's the weakest link that occurs in these organizations. And they're trying to get a way of making it better. Well, this is, of course, clearly within the role of the data stewards here, who should take this data and help the organization use it better in order to support the mission. The first place to start with most organizations, particularly if you're starting or restarting, is to take a look at one or more data governance frameworks, not necessarily for the purpose of adopting them wholesale, but to find what parts of them are useful and how those parts can be brought into the organization. So a framework is a system of ideas guiding analysis. It's a way of organizing data about the project, describing priorities for data decision making, and assessing progress. Again, something simple like don't put up the walls until the foundation has been passed. Foundation inspection, has been passed on this. And then once you do get the walls up, put the roof on as soon as possible in case you have inclement weather. And make, by the way, all of this dependent upon continued funding. Now, here's a stewardship for framework. This is not data stewardship, but it nevertheless works out, I think, very, very well. Stewardship framework in this case involves personal mastery, a vision, some sort of mentoring to make sure that people can come in and we don't have it all dependent, all our eggs in one basket, if you will. Valuing diversity of thought, shared vision, risk-taking and experimentation, vulnerability and maturity, raising awareness, and lastly, delivering results. Again, I have not found a better framework for this. I think it's wonderful. Again, the link is right there for you to take a look. And just as with all of these slides, you're welcome to use and reuse them in any way that you see beneficial. It's always nice to give credit where credit is due, but one of our goals here with these webinars is to get you guys as useful as possible. So by all means, feel free to take these. So here's a framework then for data stewardship. And it's really to look at a series of organizational challenges that come in. And those challenges, you need to do some triage. Sometimes you're going to consider them in a strategic light. And some of them are going to have to be put into a bucket list and developed and addressed some other time. But some of them are going to be important, and we're going to put them into our stewardship engine, which incorporates regulation and policy and other types of things that govern stewardship activities that are a combination of reactive and proactive things. If you have, for example, noticed that the customer data should be cleaner, that's a proactive approach. If, on the other hand, you sent a bunch of goods and services out to people with the wrong address on it, that would be a reactive type approach to this. And some of them are going to be monetary and non-monetary in the value that they come up with. That value needs to be cataloged and crowed about and made absolutely celebrated, because unfortunately we don't do as much of that as we need to. Over time, you will see that this dollar amount will improve and increase, and people will see that the dollar invested in data stewards will pay off in larger and larger multiples around this. Now, I want to also not forget to bring in what we can do with artificial intelligence at this point. In particular, at this point, the generative AI capabilities. I happen to be a fan of Gemini, but ChatGPT works really well. So the last thing you should have anybody in your organization do is write a data governance charter. Again, I gave it the command, write a data governance charter for a small nonprofit that rescues horses. All right. And it does a great job of coming up with a first draft. Very important to remember, you don't simply want to grab this information and put it straight out there without checking on it. You do want to look at it, but what a great thing. I can't imagine anybody is writing their own data governance charters at this point in time. That said, if you haven't discovered this, this is available with the free version of both ChatGPT and most of the other artificial intelligence adjuncts that can help you as a knowledge worker, and in particular, somebody who is leading data stewardship efforts get out there. So yes, take these things. They know exactly what they're doing. They do a great job of it, and it's a really wonderful place to start. Is it going to be perfect? No. On the other hand, it's a much better way of starting than to simply sit down with that proverbial blank screen of paper. All right. So let's look now at how the stewards tend to function. And I use the analogy of a fire station for the stewards. And some of you may remember the old television program called MacGyver.
Harmless.
MacGyver was famous for fixing things with duct tape and data. And he just learned around, did a bunch of different things, which is to say that stewards are going to, as I said before, proactively and reactively do things, just as people at a fire station are going to be sometimes sitting around the fire station waiting for the next fire, but most of the time they're going to be out there doing fire prevention education. Small fun fact, if you didn't know, the most potentially dangerous item that you have in your household now is an incandescent bulb. It's not that incandescent bulbs have become less safe, it's that we have gotten much better at making things fireproof and things are less likely to happen. So the threshold has gotten down to where if you are replacing incandescent bulbs with LED or other types of more efficient and safer bulbs, you will have less likelihood that you will have a house fire. Again, little bits of education that you wouldn't get unless somebody was proactively out there saying this. Another question that happens all the time in organizations is that they say to me when I come in to help them out, yeah, we'll give you 10 people and we'll give you 10%. Now, that's obviously a silly example because nobody really does 10% of their time on anything in there, but maybe it's 3 people and 1/3 of a time. I always want the full time because the low literacy rates among knowledge workers and management tell me, wow, we should really have a person full time thinking about that. If you're thinking about it part time, you're not going to get nearly the bang, especially at first, from your stewardship activities as you would like to get in order to do that. Once again, I asked Google, Gemini here, give me an argument for full-time instead of part-time data stewards. It's obviously been watching my webinars and coming up with them. Again, dedicated ownership and focus, improved data quality and consistency, enhanced collaboration and communication, increases effectiveness and ROI and long-term strategic value. Your data stewards are going to be people who are going to become increasingly valuable as they understand this. Again, I'm leaving this for you to read at your leisure on this, but let's take a look at what the literacy rate overall approach is. And let's be frank, the current approaches are not and have not been working on this. So this is a reference from my friend and colleague Randy Bean. Again, the reference is right down here. You can go Randy Bean Data and get a copy of this yourself. But in 2023, the first year, this number, after 10 years of surveys, got past 50%. So 60% of organizations said they were driving innovation with data in 2023. 41%, 2, and 5, were competing on data and analytics or managing data as a business asset. 1 in 4 creating a data-driven culture, and 1 in 5 forging a data culture. So again, not good numbers. And this is after big data, after this beginning of AI, all these things. It's just appalling numbers. We went to 2024 for the numbers, and they all of a sudden went up to 80%, 50%, 50%, 50%, and 43%. I was very skeptical of these numbers. And in fact, when numbers came out this year in 2025, while the 78% stayed there, the numbers for data-driven culture dropped considerably, as did forging a data-driven culture. And all of these I show you to not really focus your attention there, but to look instead at the difference between, are your problems, again, a question was asked on this survey for years in a row, more technology or more people and process in nature? And then 2018, the numbers were these. You can see here 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Are you getting the message here? Yes, absolutely. The challenges associated with getting data to work for your organization strategically. This is, by the way, why the airlines can't get their value out of the frequent flyer programs that they have, because 80% of these challenges minimally are people and process placed, and data governance is the only resource that addresses those challenges, and our data steward community are in fact the people who we want to have addressing these challenges, because poor data manifests itself as multifaceted organizational challenges. Root cause analysis is always part of data stewardship, and these challenges always show up filtered through either a business process or an IT system or a combination of both. And only when we connect all the dots do we realize a single data quality error is causing all of these different types of challenges out there. And that in order to address them, it helps to have a full-time team with specialized skills deployed to create a repeatable process and develop sustained organizational skills. Let me show you a little bit about that growth. When we look at it, most organizations start out there, got a data leadership component. It's usually somebody who said, I'm going to be in charge of this stuff, as opposed to the organization picking them. And they start data governance, and they say this data will be improving over time. Many people then say that's slow. And whether it is slow or not, it depends on the organization and the challenges that you're facing, but certainly it's going to be an issue in that. So many organizations then start the proactive approach, where they're now taking on specific data improvement projects and trying to improve data as a result of that focus in there. That gives us better feedback and allows us to build out the structure that we'd like to see in here with our community participants and data generators and users and all the rest of the things. And once again, over time, things get better, but we're really pretty bad about taking that translation of data things happening and translating them into organizational things happening. And organizations that get better at this quickly have much more success. Because while it's a great thing to say, hey, something good happened here with data, it's a whole lot better to be able to say, oh no, that data translated into something that happened, and that's why you got your bonus this year. Because in this case, we were able to show that good data things happened. All of this represents the purview of data stewardship efforts. We need to make sure that they incorporate all of these efforts to do this. So again, we spent a little bit of time looking at specific prerequisite challenges stemming from data debt, looking at the frameworks that are there, the fire station model, understanding that stewards are responsible for reactive as well as proactive foci in here, and that the stewardship role in the context of data governance is really an operational role. So let's talk about how to assign the stewards. Again, data stewards. And my friend David Plotkin wrote a great book on this. I would absolutely recommend the book to you, but I would also not start out by trying to define each of these 7 different types of data stewards here. Yeah, 7. I had to add them up there real quick. Because, of course, when you have this many stewards, you need an auditor that goes in and a manager of all the stewards here as well. Again, this is not where you want to start out. Let's instead try to focus in on getting some people to do some things better. It gives us, even within a particular organization, there's a variety of different things that can happen there. A clinical steward, a master data management steward, a lab director, a pharmacy director, all of these can have stewardship roles. And if they are big enough, we should definitely have a full-time person in charge of each of them. Organizations have lots of different ways of this. I wish I could find out where this one had come from, but what do the stewards do? They tangibly, within their scope, improve our organization's data asset value and improve the organization's use of data to achieve strategic objectives. We also see 2 other roles that most often pointed to: advocate, evangelize for increasing scope and rigor of data centric practices and ensure effective and efficient data government practices. But most of the time, those are not really done. And that's sort of unfortunate. I think that organizations that do include those will, in fact, achieve results faster on this. So, what are the knowledge and skills and abilities for data stewards? Well, again, we can talk about a lot of different points here. I won't bother to read them all to you, but in fact, when you look at this, come back and ask that of Chat GPT, boom, there we go. Understanding the data landscape, defining data governance framework elements for the frameworks, right? Building relationships and communications, demonstrating value and iteration, key considerations for them. Look at the most critical data steward first. Don't boil the ocean. Again, I won't read it for you, but wonderful, wonderful guidance from these things. The more you feed into your AI, and it's absolutely worthwhile to pay for it on your own if the organization won't pay for it in here, the more the AI will be able to help you. For example, if you have not heard of a RACI matrix, you should have. Of course, by now, anybody in here knows that it's important to differentiate tasks between those that are responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And the AI can take a process map and some roles that are input into it and put out a first draft of a RACI matrix for you. This is a wonderful thing. They also are very good with CRUD matrices. If you don't know what a CRUD matrix is, wait till the end of the episode here, and we'll come back and address it a little bit later on. There are things out there that the more you make your AI smart, the easier it will be for it to be of use to you. So again, it can create a RACI matrix, it can create a CRUD matrix, it can develop process models for you, it will develop data models for you. It does all sorts of things that are going to be helpful to you as a data steward in your professional. And key to this is understanding what we call systems thinking, the idea that if we understand both the forest and the trees, we're more likely to come up with holistic results. So here's a map of something that called a flyball governor for flow control. You can see that the faster the engine spins, the further the flyballs fall apart. When they fly apart, it pulls down on this lever that comes up there. The lever now rises and controls the flow of this thing here. Again, if we don't understand the system, it's very much impossible to understand how your part as the data steward is affecting the flow of data throughout the rest of the organization. And all of this, while it's critically important to get, it also underscores the fact that data in systems thinking cannot be understated. We have to make sure that we understand all of these bits and pieces in order to make a good decision about what happens here. Because one of the other things that stewards need to do is to transform organizational thinking to be we're an old type organization to we're now a data organization. All of the inputs to our organization are data. They go into the organizational data machine. All the outputs are data. They come back out. And the only question is how to manage what formally. If we put too much formality around it, it becomes expensive and a slow bureaucracy. If we do too little, we miss opportunities. Once again, a very clear role for stewards, being able to say we should manage more or less of this. And by the way, the primary determinant of all of this is interoperability, what helps our organizations become more interoperable. Now, in this case, most organizations start out with some of the data of known characteristics and some of them of unknown. It could be quality characteristics, it could be their utility, their provenance, lots of different aspects here. I would suggest to you that probably the vast majority of you that are listening to this can make the following statement about your organization, but you wouldn't want to. All of our data in our organization is of unknown quality. Boy, do you not want to let people find out about that. Please don't volunteer it in the chat. I can't control where the data goes once you put it out there. But saying that quietly to a manager and saying it's probably not what we want to have said about our organization's data quality is important. Similarly, though, over time, the amount that we know about our data should increase and the amount that's unknown should decrease. And again, further still, the point where we now have much better control of our knowledge about the data, and we now know what is an appropriate level of guidance to put in our data governance, efforts around all of that. Take a look at how strategy and governance work together. Again, the data strategy should come directly from your organizational strategy. It's absolutely critical of how the data assets are going to support organizational strategy. And that data strategy is what should guide the efforts of your data governance in there. What can these data assets do better to support strategy, and how well is that process working? Then, of course, we include the stewards in there. We have plans in progress and what's the most effective use for our limited and valuable steward resources that we have in there. In all organizations, we urge them to specify these data strategic goals in terms of business goals so that everybody in the organization can understand them and be able to operationalize them. And that the language of data governance should really be speaking metadata in order to do this, which means that both of those two elements have to be a part of stewardship training and operations in there. Similarly, once again, we want to make sure that we put all of these decisions down into some sort of trusted catalog website where everybody can go to understand how these are used in the long run in order to do this. The most important question that you have as a data steward is typically a wrong question, because most people look at the stewards and say, how should we manage all of this data? It's a lot of it. Peter's already said there's a bunch of things out there that we want to make sure that we're doing, but we can't do all of it. The right question instead is, should we include this item within the scope of our current steward practices? Because if we don't look at it that way, we will be overwhelmed. There was a project I was involved in the late 90s where we thought that we could implement a common controlled vocabulary for the entire US Department of Defense encompassing 5,000 terms. We were proven wrong. It was probably good that we learned that early on and didn't want to do it. And of course, the real key is we documented why that was a really bad idea. Because if you don't document these decisions, somebody else will come back the next year and say, I think we should do this. And you want to have good documentation as to what's changed from last year when we made this decision to include or not include this in the scope of our stewardship practices. And consequently, we should change our priorities around this. Let me give you a very specific example here, and this is, most people don't think it comes into stewardship issues, but here's a query that we ran into at one organization. You can see here it's kind of a detailed query, lots and lots of things that are happening in there. And this organization had never heard of something called query optimization. Well, here's the optimized query. You can see, if nothing else, it is simpler than it was before. You might say to yourself, oh, great. Okay, so you spent a couple of hours to optimize that query. It was actually a couple of days in this case. And people said, well, what was the value of doing that? You made it run maybe a second faster. Oh, okay. How often did it run? Well, in this case, we had a query that ran over 1 billion times a day. And 1 billion seconds add up into something that is very tangible very quickly. Repeating thousands, millions of times, in this case, 1 billion times in a day, meant the organization was no longer bleeding unnecessarily from a whole bunch of cuts that were problematic as it went through its daily operation. Each of these can be hugely profitable, if you will, from an organizational perspective. When we look at this too, one of the most important areas of bleeding unnecessary that most organizations are facing is in fact their cloud bills. It is the number one complaint of CEOs worldwide right now. Why is my cloud bill so blankety blank high? Well, it's because we have badly implemented governance around using the cloud resources, which are good, but again, not in this case unlimited and certainly not free, which is how they were sold in the first place. I like to think of these things as a sort of a data sandwich. We have lots of aspects of literacy, kind of uneven amounts of data supply and standards that are working with them. And which, again, the goal of stewardship is to even these things out so they can all work well together. Because if we don't have them working well together, they will continue to cause friction. I had to go all the way to India to see the first version of this Deming quote that's appearing in the bottom right-hand corner there. Quality, engineering, and architecture work products do not happen accidentally is a sign that was on the cash register above this tea farm in India that I was vacationing to see. And it was wonderful to see it there. Of course, you guys know that this is doubly true for data. architecture in there, because data, no matter what you do, if we're going to get it to work, has to have well done literacy, standardization, and data supply in order to get quality data engineering architecture work products to work. Because data is not a project. Unfortunately, most organizations tend to think of it as a project. Again, a project is something with a durable, usable life in less than 1 year, and we should be delivering project deliverables in 90-day increments or 2-week sprints, whatever it is that you're doing. Our data evolution instead is measured in years. It evolves, it's not created, it's significantly more stable. One of the wonderful things about living as long as I have is that I've been able to go back to organizations that I worked with 40 years ago and see that, in fact, they are still using the same basic data components in their makeup, in their these prerequisite architectural components are necessary for agile development, and the only alternative to them in agile development is to create more silos out of it. Again, just to very briefly, I was addressing a PMI group just yesterday on this, and they, of course, love this slide because if you're in PMI, you understand that one of the key pieces to a project is it has a beginning and an end, whereas programs are ongoing. People are going to ask you, when are we going to be done with our Steward program? And the answer is when we're done with our HR program or our finance program, whichever one is more important to the organization. Each of these is going to last you the duration of your organization's existence. And I think we can confidently say in the future, it's going to have to work that way because organizations need to change their thinking. Again, in the old model of things, we had sort of plans that were made at the top, and then we had people that eventually made something and we could revise those plans. But truly what's happening now is that your organization is all about data until it's not about just data. Again, this is sort of the practical approach of looking at things through data eyes. So the question to ask yourself is, what business are you in? The car manufacturers, for example, are making parts coordinated. Sometimes they go back and forth across the Mexican and Canadian border multiple times as they're doing it. And this is, of course, why the average car is going to rise by $12,000 as a result of the current tariff war that has unnecessarily been foisted on everybody at this point in time. Let's not get into politics, but again, you can see how that works out. So one of the things that happens here is that most organizations are looking at all sorts of cool, neat things, whether it's AI based or analytics, and they come up with data marts. These are the things in yellow and blue. And eventually we get to warehouse data and we start to make really cool little dashboards and things that come off of it, all of it wonderful. But when they go for feedback in here, they tend to remain on the right-hand side of that fine red line there. This is out of the scope typically of what most data stewards see. Data stewards are typically going to be focused more on this black box on the left-hand side there in order to come up with more useful outputs as a result of this. So the focus of steward efforts should be sequential. We have organizations without formal stewards, and they're going to try and do something faster, better, cheaper, or less risky. And that generally involves a combination of improving existing operations or innovating. Well, if we don't have stewards, we don't want to have that. So let's eliminate that as a possibility. Let's look at Walmart as a wonderful organization that understands about effectiveness and efficiency. And that is the place to start, because if you go up here and try to start where Apple starts, where they are using it to create strategic opportunities, I want you to just imagine for a minute the really wonderful people who at Walmart are doing things faster, better, cheaper, right, down there, and telling them to be innovative. And it blows their minds. Or better still, go to Apple and tell them to be cheap. Well, once again, it's going to blow their minds. So sequentially, and again, you don't want to take both on at once. That's equally as bad. So looking at this from a build perspective, let's find some savings down here in T1 and use it to create opportunities up here in T3. And only 1 in 10 organizations has actually started this journey, which means it can become something that is a sustained competitive advantage. Now, again, just dropping back into no more AI here. Google has a product out called notebooklm.google.com. It is absolutely free of charge. For some reason, they figure you need to have strange AI characters in order to advertise it. But I'm going to just give you a very brief example. As a professor for more than 30 years at Virginia Commonwealth University, I'm expected to be very familiar with 261 specific different university policies. You can see they're divided up into a number of different characteristics. And I took all of those policies and locked them into something called Notebook LM, read them all in this case, pulled them all together, and listen up carefully.
All right, let's be real for a sec.
Okay.
Nobody, and I mean nobody,
Mhm.
actually looks forward to spending their precious weekend
Right.
buried in a stack of university policies,
Nice.
like trying to find like a really exciting, you know,
Yeah.
thriller novel in the library rule book section,
That's
right?
bad.
Of
Who
course, I
does
can
that?
ask it
Nobody.
lots and lots of questions.
But
It takes those things and makes it into a 20-minute podcast, which could be a great icebreaker at your meetings, can also be very useful if you have a document that you haven't had a chance to ingest and you'd rather walk the dog. Now you can do both at the same time. Again, all of these are wonderful characteristics, but we have garbage in and garbage out as a limiter on all of these. So why do we need a stewardship role? Well, I've given you definitions of stewardship and said who else in your organization is going to look after your data assets. You need to do that with a focus that involves strategy, and that strategy creates a data architecture. That data architecture then allows the organization to start addressing various challenges that they have that are stemming from data debt. Picking a data stewardship framework is very important, and making sure that people understand that they're doing a combination of proactive and reactive roles in this role in the context of data governance, and that they can start simply but change the cadence. It's not the same way of operating as we do in IT development. There are some foundational prerequisites, and we need to practice simplicity, agility, and also practice over and over again. Now, as we're headed towards our Q&A section here at the end of the hour, I just want to also give you a little bit of guidance around communicating these roles. Imagine that you have lots of things that are involved in your data, and we're data people, so we're talking about it. You've got data management, data governance, data stewardship, and you're trying to explain this to a non-data person. Do you know what they hear? Yes, the old Charlie Brown teacher metaphor in there. Keep the conversation simple. Talk to them about your data program. That's really what they need to understand in order to be sure that they can work on these things. Data program is very, very simple. And again, just going to ChatGPT here and saying, sorry, I said ChatGPT again, it's Google Gemini. What is it you need to have for internal and external communication? A really good set of constructs here. You guys are knowledge workers, so use this to support your knowledge work efforts on all of these things. So a couple of takeaways here. Again, stewards own the results. They also control the remediation process. The need for stewards is increasing, the data volume is increasing, and there's a lack of improvement that we've had around all of this. It's a relatively new discipline. It's going to conform to organizational constraints, which means there is no one best way. That's why you hire stewards, so they can figure out the best way in order to do this. And they must be driven by a data strategy that complements the organizational strategy and results in direct data management application, speaking the language of metadata and driving particular process improvements. And let me give you just a couple of examples of this. Again, comparing the story types in here. If I'm going to clean some data, the business goes, yawn, right? Well, if I decrease the number of undeliverable targeted marketing ads, I've got the user's attention in here. If I'm going to reorganize the database, again, so what, right? Well, if I'm going to increase the ability of the sales force to perform their own analysis, that is something that I can get to. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick little side story here. I have a cousin, Fred, who was the number one craft salesperson for years and years and years. And He told me that he could have been 20% more productive his entire career before he retired, because he would spend 4 days out selling. And on the fifth day, Friday, he would stay at home and take his own sales data that he used to keep his own system running that kept him as the number one salesperson in there. And he would convert it into stuff that their SAP system could conform. Again, just a terrible, terrible waste of time. He said, I would have absolutely been minimally 20% more productive on all of these. These are the stories that your people need to understand in order to get this. Develop a taxonomy. Oh my God, why would I want to do that? Well, would you want everybody to speak the same language? Yeah, now you're talking. I can definitely use the same language around it. God, optimize a query. Well, I already gave you the example on that one. 1 second off a task that runs a billion times a day, that's in seconds, and it adds up to some tangible dollars very, very rapidly. My favorite one around all of these is my own, near and dear to my heart, where I started out in this business 40 years ago, reverse engineering the legacy system. Don't come to me with that. But if you're going to make a change in a system and evolve it in one form or another, is it important to understand what's good about the old system and what's bad about it, so that we can make sure the good stuff comes into the new system and the bad stuff stays away? Yes, absolutely. These are all critical components for understanding how stewards work within our organization on this. Once again, here's a couple little bits. We've got a webinar coming up next month on reference and master data ethics. It's been a very popular one here. And looking at data governance, we'll take another look at a broader perspective. But next time through, in June, on all of this, my publisher would be really mad at me if I didn't flash the books up for you one more time to get you all that there. Well, interesting. I lost my whole screen. Right there we go. Pops up there, and there's the books. And now it's time to welcome Shannon back on and get you guys to try and give us some really good questions here. Shannon, back over to you.
Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation. You had me giggling there a few times, I gotta say. There's some really great information. So, and if you have questions for Peter, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. I saw a lot of great questions in the chat as well, but it helps me to facilitate if you get it in the Q&A, but I'll try and get through all of them. And just answer the most commonly asked questions. Just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email to all registrants by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording of the session. So, Peter, who should own the data in an organization?
Really good question. So if there is no owner, then it's a problem. And that's, so you get pictures of people pointing their fingers in both a way, and there's no responsibility for it. I'll tell you a brief little story on this one. Many, many moons ago, I was involved in something called the DoD suicide prevention problem. And I had a whole bunch of colonels that I brought into rooms. And these colonels were involved with my staff looking through the various bits and pieces and saying that my data can be used under these circumstances, and my data can be used here, and my data can be used here. And of course, it was different. We ended up with a 30 by 30 matrix to try and keep track of all of these problems. Well, it was a big, big challenge. And we had a cheat that we could use, a chit that we could cache with the Secretary of the Army, who came into the room and observed us trying to work on these problems by a 30 by 30 matrix. And he put his portfolio down on the desk with a very loud thump and said, ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement to make. All of this data is my data. I own it. Anybody that wants to tell me why they can't use my data to save my soldiers' lives, my office is right around the corner. Are we clear? Now, in addition to that, he solved our problem, which was terrific and the right thing to do, because of course we did want to save soldiers' lives in this particular exercise. But he also told me that I could reproduce this with attribution. And I did put it in one of the books that's out there. So you can read about it if you want. But I've also told this story to more than 100 corporate executives since that has occurred. And not a single corporate executive, not a one, has had the guts to say all the data belongs to company X, organization X, whatever it is, in order to do this. And I can't quite fathom why that is the case, but it is the case that it should be. The organizational data for the Secretary of the Army belongs to the Secretary of the Army, and his data should be used as much as possible to help save soldiers' lives. Of course, we can drop down to Bank X and say Bank X data belongs to Bank X and not to anybody within Bank X in order to do that. I had one manufacturing corporation that tried to keep it all to themselves. They were like, well, this belongs to this organization, and they wouldn't let parts of the organization have it. Again, the concept of ownership of data is one of the most harmful things that gets in the way of all kinds of things around data governance and stewardship type activities. So just like I said earlier, just say no. It is absolutely the most harmful thing that you can have in order to it. And definitely should not be the case that somebody should own it. It should belong to the organization as a whole.
Okay. So, Peter, should stewards be preferably hired from outside the org, presumably based on prior data stewardship experience, or should stewards be preferably promoted, reassigned from among the existing employees, presumably based on knowledge and or enthusiasm for data?
I would say the latter. And it may be the case that you are, in fact, able to find somebody enthusiastic who happens to know the domain's data and has some steward experience. We have a number of people out there that have 10 and 15 years experience among them at this point in time. But in general, when you have to look back and forth, I think you're going to find that somebody who knows your data is better qualified to become a steward in that category than somebody who does not know your data. I can tell you when I go into corporations and organizations, I will always find that there are some people who are sitting there in the back row who actually I was up in Canada just last week, and there was a wonderful data owner there that had really come across as part of an acquisition, and she knew exactly what needed to be done in this organization. She just needed to have the political capital in order to expend that. And again, is doing a fabulous job of this. So more likely you're going to find somebody who knows your data better than an external person, but it's not 100% sure. I guarantee you that there are some people there who have a really good knowledge of certain types of data, and they might be very valuable to your stewardship team. Really good question. Thanks for it.
Indeed. So, and you're going to love this one too. How important are certifications like CDMP for data stewards to obtain?
Once again, certifications are really important for all of this because this is a new profession. Imagine just trying to hire somebody in any sort of a data leadership program, and you don't know what you're doing with your data, or you don't know what the data leaders are supposed to do with respect to your data and the business operations. So certified data management practitioner is something that Dataversity and DAMA both support, and would very much like to see you guys have it out there. And we don't, I believe, have a stewardship specialization. I may be wrong about that. I'd have to take a look real quick to see. But it's certainly one of the exams that's going to be on the fast path to do it. So hopefully you get a data leadership piece and then a certification specialty in the area of data stewardship. It's something that gives you some level of understanding. We have about, I think, Lloyd told me the other day, he has about 800 people that have passed it at the master level. And that's a very small complement of individuals around the organization and around the world, really, that have access to these things. So we're hoping to increase that. And the more that we do, I think the more common, the more likelihood we are to see that these concepts are adopted. I can tell you that there are a number of countries that have adopted these concepts and said they are necessary to the future of their organizations in the various parts of the world that are out there. And thank you for doing that and supporting everything that we do here in this this type of an exercise.
Yeah, and I put the link to the CDMP information off the DAMA website there in the chat for everybody. So you can
Thank you,
take
Shannon.
a look at that, of course. And you can also take a look at the training to prepare for that on our website. So I will send a link as that for that as well. It's a good time. Anyway, shameless plug for both. Okay. So how important is selecting data stored by domains instead of source systems?
I think that the statement that I favor the most around this came from a couple of data leaders who we had at one of our local data meetings, and I'm going to eventually write it into a book out there, which is to say that they know how to do data. What they don't know is how to get your organization to do data better. And so, given that type of a statement, I think that really the local pieces that again, they have a saying that all politics is local, things like that. Well, in the stewardship example here, it's really, really critical to make sure that you don't run into certain minefields. I mentioned before that we had a situation that came up where somebody, quote, owned the data in one of these organizations that I had consulted with a number of years ago. And literally, it caused the organization to wait 2 years before they could make progress in this area because that concept was important. And this organization, this individual, actually held some power in the organization and wouldn't let things move forward because people kept insulting the data that was being provided by this particular portion of the organization. So it's really, really key to understand how your organization best uses data given these types of constructs in there.
Thank you. Some great questions coming in. We got lots of time, so keep them coming. Peter, you didn't mention any negatives for full-time stewards. Was that on purpose, or do you not see any negatives?
The real key for stewardships being negative as far as full time is that oftentimes, if they don't really have a good set of guidance, somebody at the organization will go, okay, we've had, and again, I'll just make a very simple example. We've had 5 data stewards in, they've been working on things for 5 years. So that represents, and they're all getting paid $100,000. So just real easy math. That means we've invested $2.5 million in our stewardship efforts here. Can they show, in this case, that they have been able to provide at least $2.5 million of value to the organization? And if they go into it full time and don't have the idea that again, need to show value on a regular basis here, it's going to be very easy for somebody to come along and critique it and say, oh, well, what do we get for this $2.5 million that we've spent 5 people, $100,000 a piece for 5 years, right? So you want to make sure that these stewards are, in fact, able to do this and to show the value that they have of this. Now, it's harder to do that in a part-time fashion because then you say, okay, well, they were only working 1/3 of the time, so therefore it's not $100,000 a piece, it's $33,000 a piece, right? Well, again, the math gets very complicated very quickly. I'm sure there are some negative stories where that's happened to people, but most of the time, if you're full time at it, you think about all of these types of activities that I've shown here that our Gemini assistant came up with as a really, really good way of describing what are these full-time activities that you should be. Again, you're going to think about it in the shower. You're going to think about it on your drive to work. Again, not that you're going to obsess about it, but you have more mind share when you're in a full capacity than if you're trying to split your time over 2, 3, 4 other major tasks that you're trying to accomplish. So I do like the value of full-time data stewardship in there, but your organization may not be able to afford it just yet. You may only be able to do it half time. Well, if you can do that, let's say that you get a quarter time, and so you've invested $25,000 into it. If that individual is able to show $50,000 value from a $25,000 investment, then that would indicate to the organization that investing more in that would seem to be good. Of course, just like everything else, I've also seen organizations where I come in and there's, 70 or 80 stewards and they're all full time. Again, go back to that Dave Plotkin activity here where we had all this list of stewards that are up here, that's probably overkill and probably very difficult to show a positive return on investment given that kind of a situation. Where is that slide here for Mr. Plotkin? Yes, there we go. Really, really good book on this, but again, sort of a very overcomplicated approach if you start trying to distinguish between business data stewards and project data stewards and operational data stewards and legacy data stewards. Yeah, that's a lot of fine detail to print out. It's better to grow and see what is going to be useful than to start out by over prescribing it at first. Again, great questions.
Questions, great answer. So Peter, do you need some data governance tools to start a data stewardship community?
What a great question. The initial set of tools that you need are really just tools that support your general office work in there. And starting out low, you can do this with, again, your data dictionary can exist as a spreadsheet, and then eventually moving it to a single page that everybody in the organization can access with definitions on it. It's a trick I learned from Nokia many years back. They had something called the Nokia Term Bank, and they used it extremely effectively in order to do that. But yes, as you get further in your organization, then looking at different tools, there's a group out of Ireland called Sandhill Consulting that has a little lightweight package called Compass. Probably most people are familiar with Calibra as a very larger thing that's closer to buying an ERP. And quite frankly, you need to have a good justification in order to do that. But many organizations grow to that level and do come up with very, very good efforts around that quickly. So the tool set is something I don't think we do our tools anymore, do we, Shannon? We stopped that one, but maybe might be fun to go do a webinar on data governance tools and look at them from a compare and contrast perspective, right?
Indeed, yeah. Absolutely. And we have some demo days and some tool presentations too that we can I can send
that's
out
right.
to
You've
you.
got some really good demo days coming up.
Yeah. In fact, a data governance one this month, so I'll send a link to that as well, which is free. So you describe a single role data steward. I can imagine degrees of stewardship with incremental skill building and roles appropriate to the scale or importance of the data. So this kind of goes back to like what you were talking about with, Plotkin's several data stewards. You want to expand on that a little bit and share your thoughts on the specific inquiry?
I think the questioner actually did a great job. Again, as you start out, your first piece is to put in place somebody who is in this role of stewardship in here, and that there are, sorry, that's the right screen. There we go. That they have this sort of stewardship framework because this is going to be new for most organizations, and that after you've done that for a bit and gotten good at it, then you might want to subdivide that role up and say, okay, now we're going to have stewards that are proactive and stewards that are reactive, or stewards that are focused on quality as opposed to stewards that are focused on customer delivery. Again, it depends on what is going not as well as it should in your organization and how that organization can help to improve what's going on with respect to the business. Again, I'll refer you back to this slide here as well that just talks specifically about the role of stewardship. And here again, you've got the data strategy that is saying, what are our data assets going to do to help us achieve our strategic objectives? And the data strategy goes into governance and focuses the role of data governance because there's many things it could do, but you should do those things that are strategic before you do those things that are not strategic. And you have a limited number of stewardship resources that you have in order to get those to roll. Again, just what can we do with the limited resources that we have that will be most effective? And the word comes up, leverage. What can we do to leverage our stewards most effectively in these areas?
Thank you. So, Peter, our stewards are all administrators, full-time jobs. Governance is an other duty as assigned, quote unquote. sometimes explicitly defined, sometimes not, rather than trying to overcome large obstacles related to changes in job descriptions. I'm considering creating a data governance job description. Am I nuts, or is this a viable approach?
I think it's very viable. I think it's entirely reasonable to go to your HR group and ask them how well they have performance of people when they have their loyalties split between multiple tasks. And that most HR groups will say, yep, if you can simplify their tasks and focus them in on one or two things, as opposed to 16 or 17, again, I'm exaggerating here for the purpose of illustration, but that it's very, very useful to have singular focus. Also, of course, go to your chat GPT, right? And ask them. And that, by the way, feed in. Now, be careful with this. About half the organizations that we work with these days encourage employees to use ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever, as part of their day-to-day operation. About half of them say absolutely under no circumstances use it because they're terrified of it. Um, the split is pretty much nonsensical because, of course, those of you that actually are told not to use it at work simply go home and use it, or you whip out your phone and use it off the network in order to do this. But the idea here is that in looking at these things and saying, first of all, if you're part-time at it, do you have incentive to get better? And many organizations, if you're just part-time at something, you're thinking, yeah, I don't really need to get better at it. I could get better at it, but I get paid to do other things, so I'm going to get better at the things that I get paid to do. So again, incentive systems are worthwhile. Having a full-time job description for these things and an argument for why that should be the case, and then set it up as an experiment. Say we're going to try it for 1 year and see what one individual in a full-time role can achieve, as opposed to perhaps the way things have been going, part-time, multiple users doing it, and go ahead and say A/B. Let's see whether it works well for this organization or not. It's not too much to ask for a year to experiment, and HR certainly is not going to have a good answer for you right up front, unless they're in contact with colleagues and friends where they can look around at best practices and say, yeah, they listened to one of my webinars and said, I believe his arguments are correct and that he should do it full time. By the way, let us know how that works. That's one of the reasons we have DAMA International, so you can share those experiences with others, and so that everybody doesn't have to learn all of these lessons at the same time over and over and over again. Right, Shannon?
And still learning them over and over again.
We are. We both are. We both are. That's what
Indeed. So, Peter, we have an MDM department which is responsible for SAP, MDG, some SAP master data governance, and specific data domains like documents and business partner globally. There are ideas that the MDM department owns all the records and system design. Shouldn't the business be the owner of the records and MDM of system design, templates, and standards?
It is an interesting question, isn't it? We have really not been able to provide good guidance around that. The key is that somebody is in charge. And that's what's happened in most organizations, is that nobody has been in charge, and consequently things have gotten worse. If you do have somebody that's in charge, let's make certain that that they were holding their feet to the fire, not in a bad way, but saying, what are they supposed to be doing, and are they in fact achieving that? After you've done those well-defined requirements around the data requirements and system requirements, then you can come back and say, okay, great, now who is best qualified to do this? So, for example, one of the things that happens a lot of times is that people will say, oh, okay, we're going to take our IT people and we're going to go ask the business users what their requirements are. Well, how many business users have been taught how to give requirements? Generally, the answer is none. And so they're not very good at it. And that's not necessarily saying they're bad people. They just, if they haven't had training in how to give requirements, they're not going to give you very good requirements. I mentioned this PMI talk that I was on yesterday, and they had a piece where analytics is a big role for many organizations today. And we all know that one of the best outcomes from an analytics exercise is another question. And that drives IT people crazy. They're like, well, why couldn't you tell me that at first? Well, you didn't know it until you actually went through the journey of getting there, and that the process really needs to be an evolutionary one so that you can quickly and easily add new data points, new data sets to the exercise and come up with better questions that you need to ask. All of these things are really, really important, and understanding that just because people have a requirement is better than not having anybody be responsible for it at all. So while that may not be the right place, I think the only way you can really make a good case for it is by coming back and saying, what should they be doing, and are they in fact achieving it? If it happens to be running well out of the MDM group, maybe that's a good answer. Keep it there. Like I said, I don't know that that's going to work for every organization, but if it's working well for your organization, or at least somebody is taking responsibility for it, that's better than making it everybody's responsibility, because we'll end up right here in this gap between business and IT.
There's always that gap there, always that question. So, Peter, we've got about 7 minutes left. Need time to get at least one more question in, if not a couple more. You mentioned you mentioned that stewardship is a full-time, but what if organizations don't have enough funds for another headcount? Can you do like a 50-50 split?
Absolutely. And again, better something than nothing, right? So, whatever it is, you need to get people thinking about looking at this fiduciary responsibility for data. You have somebody in your group, you have many people in your organization who are responsible for things from a fiduciary perspective. Again, I'm putting some of them up on the screen here in order to do this. But most people aren't aware that the duty of the fiduciaries is to act in good faith, to care for their organization, and to be loyal to the organization. Nobody generally without this role playing that role in your organization. So yes, absolutely, part-time is better than nothing. But if you have the no more resources than that, then make a very good business case and say half of this person's $100,000 salary, I'm just making it very simple, has been devoted to data stewardship activities, and that individual has been able to show X amount of dollars as a result of this. Maybe not the first year, but certainly by the second year, there ought to be some kinds of results. So the organization can say, oh, okay, so I might get better results if I had a full-time person doing it. Give them the business case. Let them work their way up to it. Remember, we've gone without data stewardship for most of recorded history. And so organizations have gotten along without it. The question is, how much better could you be doing if you had more? Absolutely. Part-time better than none, and full-time better than part-time.
So, what are your recommendations to enable or empower data stewards to create business definitions for legacy terms when there is little to no documentation to leverage?
Wonderful. First of all, reverse engineering, I mentioned that very late in the presentation, is a really good way of unlocking those business definitions in order to come up with it right away. And just having, again, a set of common terms so that we're sharing this information. Again, I put the Tower of Babel up here in order to talk about it. I have been to places where people have been talking about the term flour. And it wasn't until 10 minutes into the conversation before they realized that one of them was talking about a plant and the other was talking about a baking ingredient. And that actually occurred in front of an audience in Washington, D.C. And it's just a perfect illustration of why we need to have this interoperability between these terms so that everybody can understand them. And more importantly than that, that we actually write them down in that trusted catalog so that people can refer to them in the future. If it's not written down, it's probably not real.
I love it. So, it gives us about 4 minutes to get another question in here. So, what are some of the key data governance or data quality data governance KPI metrics we can provide to data stewards so it can help, so it can be valuable to him or her for his analysis?
Wonderful question. And the key metrics around all of this start out with the very basic ones. Is all of your data in your organization of unknown quality? That's not a question you want to ask in public, but it is a question that comes up in many, many instances. in order to do this. So look around and find out how many of these. Okay, so maybe not all of our data is of unknown quality, but is half of it? I mean, again, just find out. We do these things called data branding exercises with stewards that are actually super, super useful in there. We can say, look, you don't want to take data from just anywhere. You want to get data from known quality sources and be able to move it in to this type of thing. That's just for starters. You can go in more detailed and say, what are the kinds of things that are happening in our organization that should be really focused in on activities that are businessy, right? Again, I put this slide up earlier here, but don't just keep it vague. Keep it focused in on the business terms, right? So if I've got some quality issues around here, and I've got one customer that's a retail customer that very much does not like addressing their customers by the wrong name. And so they have a very big effort focused in on trying to make sure that they address people better, because they've decided that that's what differentiates them in the marketplace, being able to know their customers a little better than their competition, who just knows them as a customer number, which is on a loyalty card somewhere, but it doesn't actually help them improve sales around that. Again, lots and lots of very, very specific measures. I'll also refer you to, gosh, who is it that does the quality work in that, Shannon? Somebody's done a real good quality piece. I'm trying to remember. Well, I'm sure it's on the Dataversity website somewhere that they have it, but
there's so many.
There are
Mark's,
a bunch.
yeah, Mark's done some data quality, but Danette, you've got Laura Sebastian Coleman. I don't know which one, who are you talking about specifically?
Both of them are excellent, though, and Mark is, of course, great as well.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, Peter, I'm afraid that is bringing us right to the half hour there, which is all the time that we have for this webinar. So many great questions, everybody. Really appreciate all the engagement and everything that we do. So if you, and just a reminder, again, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday to all registrants with links to the slides, the recording, and all the additional things that have been requested throughout the webinar. Well, Peter, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. A pleasure as always.
Indeed. And thanks to everybody. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks, y'all.
We'll see you next month for reference and master data, right?
Perfect. Yeah. Oh, it's a good one. Another good one.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.